Welcome to the Hunting Beast Report, a live video podcast with Dan Infalt and host Jeremy Gillespie.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Stealth Outdoors. The off-season's a great time to rehab your gear, so head on over to Stealth Outdoors at www.stealthoutdoors.com to pick up some climbing stick wraps, cam buckle covers, platform cable wraps, or stealth strip rolls for all of your miscellaneous silencing needs. Today's show is also made possible by Hunting Beast Gear, innovators in mobile hunting gear and the designers of the Beast Sticks and Beast Stand. Check out the latest products at www.huntingbeastgear.com. And now, on to the podcast. All right, we're live today. Special guest, Mario Trafficante. I don't know what Dan's out doing, on vacation or something, but how you doing today, Mario?
Doing good. How are you, Jeremy?
Good. Well, I appreciate you coming on. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and we got some matching plaid today. So if people are wondering what the Beast Gear Stealth Outdoors plaid project looks like, I have the jacket on, and you're wearing the shirt jacket. So
yeah.
It sounds like that's been a popular seller.
Yeah, people have really liked it. It's got a Sherpa fleece on the inside. It's all YKK zippers. I don't know if you can see, but there's a combined Beast Gear Stealth Outdoors Arrow logo on here. You got Stealth Outdoors around the cuff, but these are really nice go-to ones. I mean, the jacket is a good one for, wearing in that fall season. And in my cold basement right now, this is a good option for staying warm. So
yeah. So that's one of the things a lot of people are always asking about. What's the latest with Beast Gear? So the plaid project is one of those things, and you guys were recently at the Dells show. So talking to me about that, and then anything else that's in the works.
Yeah, sure. This time of the year, we are ramping up for show season. So we're actually going to we went to the Dells show, which is the open season sportsman show. It's actually one of our best shows. We get a lot of people that go through there because it's a really nice venue. It's at the Kalahari. So there's a lot of other things to do. It brings in a lot of people. A lot of people came out to see us, talk to Dan, talk to the other people in the crew. We had our new camera arm there along with all our other gear. So it was a really good weekend. It was a good show, even though the weather, Wisconsin was still providing us with some snow on Friday night and a little bit on Saturday morning, but people still came out. And our next show that we'll be going to, we're going to do a small event at Gearhead Archery. So Gearhead Archery is a Wisconsin-based bow company. They make obviously standard compound bows out of 6061 T6 aluminum, but they also make bows out of carbon. They have crossbows that they make, but Skip just opened up a new shop in Madison, Wisconsin. So we're going to go there for a couple days and just do some show and tell in gear and help Skip promote his new shop. So if you're in the Madison, Wisconsin area, I posted that event out on Facebook, so you can go there and check out the times for that. I think we're going to run 10 a.m. to 4 o'clock each day. So he's got a really nice shop there, and then a big area in the back where, weather permitting, hopefully the weather's kind to us. And we get some nice days to hang some gear outside and show and tell some saddle stuff, as well as the tree stand and climbing sticks and everything in between. And then we'll be going to the two mobile expo shows. The one that's the Southern show in June is down in Georgia. And then the other show, the Northern show in Kalamazoo, Michigan, that we were at last year. Dan will be speaking at that show again. So we're going to go to both of those. We may add one other show at the end of the summer. And then we're going to a mountain archery challenge show. But that's going to be a smaller group. It's like a private invite only show that Derrick Wolf is putting on at his place. So yeah, we got quite a bit of traveling around that we're doing for that.
Yeah, speaking of Derrick Wolf, I was surprised to see recently you had a podcast on, was it on the Hunting Beast Gear channel, or where did I see that with Derrick Wolf? Yeah. Maybe talk to me about that for people that haven't seen it.
Yeah, so
And
really,
explain who
Derrick.
Derrick Wolf is. Sorry.
So for those that you don't know, Derrick Wolf is former NFL defensive lineman. He was an all-pro defensive lineman, Super Bowl champion, sacked Tom Brady in the Super Bowl. But generally speaking, one of the most well-liked NFL players in NFL history. Derrick is a big advocate for the outdoors. He loves hunting. Grew up in Ohio, actually. I started getting turned on to some of the stuff he was doing because he's big into fitness and he's big into the outdoors. Obviously, he does a lot of elk hunting, mule deer hunting out west. He lives in Colorado. And he's been in that whole kind of mixed martial arts wrestling scene. He wrestled when he was younger. So I thought it would be a really interesting conversation to have a talk with him. And it just so happened that he had way back in the early days, he had purchased some bee sticks. And when he was doing some of his production of his video, I was told by a friend that, oh, hey, Derrick's got bee sticks in the video. So I reached out to him and we had a couple conversations, and I asked him if he'd be interested in doing a podcast, and he graciously said, yeah, let's do it. Very humble guy. It was a lot of fun talking to him. Loves working out, obviously, loves fitness. He's into the whole experience of the outdoors. Very similar mindset. I think that resonates with a lot of people that, it's not just about, we all love to chase big whitetails. For him, he loves chasing whitetails. He's obsessed with elk hunting right now, but it's about kind of the entire experience of the adventure of going out after these animals. And he also is doing a lot of advocacy for preserving those rights in Colorado. But his Wolfpack Foundation, he's also doing a lot of benefits to get underprivileged children and other people that don't have access to hunting, right? They didn't grow up with it, and get them exposed to it to try to get some more exposure and people into the outdoors, which I think is really cool and something that's, valuable for all of us. So.
Yeah, hard to argue with any of that. And speaking of elk hunting, if anyone applied for Montana and you hadn't heard yet, results came out on Monday. So if anybody applied for a non-resident tag, you can go to MyFWP and search Montana draw results, and you can find out if you drew. And I'm excited because I drew the same elk tag limited entry area that I had last year, where I managed to screw up several times, but I'm looking for vengeance this year, Mario. I I had a lot of good encounters and I learned a lot. So I think this is the year. I say that every year, but we'll see.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I wish you the best of luck.
I appreciate it.
I vicariously live through the stories of other people that hunt elk, but I hear it's quite the experience. So
it is. It's super physical. It's just way different. You got to really want to shoot one, because if you're hunting public land, at least in Montana, they're in pockets and they're hard to find. So you spend a lot of time just looking for elk, and that can wear on. Like last year, I think I had 6 hunts and probably, 6 to 10 miles each one of those hunts before I even saw an elk. But then when I got in them, I was on them pretty good for 2 weeks. So it's just feast or famine, it seems like.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the camera arm, and I think it's before we got online, you said maybe you have one there. Or did I hear that right?
Yep, I got one sitting here.
If we go over that a little bit, and like maybe some of the R&D and design and how that came to be.
Yeah, let's do it. So for a while, Dan and I had the notion of wanting to do a camera arm for obvious reasons. There were other iterations of camera arms that were out there. Of course, the original Hunting Beast camera arm, which some of you might be familiar with, it's a larger camera arm. It has a 3-arm system with a larger back end that would support against a tree. And that was a great camera arm. For stability, it would hold bigger cameras. I mean, I hunted with that thing for, I think almost 12 years now. But with all the shrinking of the size of everything and trying to reduce weight, that camera arm is just, something that's bigger, it's bulkier, it certainly does the job. But we wanted to come up with something that was kind of a hybrid. So obviously when you really shrink size with camera arms, one of the main issues that you get is stability. So you get stability loss in the arm itself, so you'll get bounce. And as a mobile hunter, a lot of times when you get a deer approaching you, we tend to set up, whether you're a saddle hunter or a tree stand hunter, you kind of like to set up in the direction of where the deer are coming from, or at least that's, what you're estimating to do, right? So you're not have to be, so you don't have to make a lot of unnecessary movement. But quite often you're moving that camera right at the moment before you're positioning to shoot. So stability was something that we talked about. Like when I moved the arm, I needed to lock in and not sit and vibrate. As you shrink the size of these camera arms, reducing weight and material, that's one of the factors that we looked at. So stability of the arms, also reach length. So you want to be in that 25 to 30 inch length, whether you're setting up behind a tree in a saddle position or in front of the tree in a tree stand position. I like to set up with it on my offside, so which is typically my right side. So I'll pivot and wrap the arm around my body to get to my shooting side. That's not to say that I won't set it up on my left side. That's just that with my camcorder, my viewfinder then is on the opposite side, which depending on the height that I set it at, that can be, a little wonky. It's kind of whatever your preference is. Now, if you're set up behind the tree, it's kind of a non-issue because you're swinging it around. So the other one was length. We wanted to get in that 25 to 30 inch reach length so that you could wrap around a tree easily and you could wrap around your body. And then, we wanted to use a design, obviously, that was compact enough so that it could slip in your pocket or slip in your pack, and also reduce weight and all those other things that people are looking for. There's certain design aspects of it from a manufacturing standpoint that we wanted to make repeatable, so we could make it a little more affordable. So that went into design of it, of course. And then stylistically, we knew that we wanted a bigger. We repeated our antler bracket on the back, and we wanted to go with something like this to get the stability as you set it up on a tree, right? So this is a pocket bolt in here with a washer in the center of that. So that pocket bolt is Loctited in, and it allows this to rotate, but it's stout, so it's not going to freely spin, but it can rotate and position on a tree. So if you have to balance the camera arm left and right. Now, the one thing about smaller camera arms, you're going to get a little bit of adjustment going up and down vertically. But a full-size camera arm obviously is going to give you a lot more adjustment because you're getting both, vertical and horizontal adjustment. But there's some trade-offs. So with this, you're going to get that horizontal adjustment. There's going to be a little less vertical adjustment on it. But we went with the Beast bracket. Obviously, stylistically, that represents our brand, but this is wide enough so that when you're pulling the camera arm around the tree or pushing it around the tree, this gives you a really stable base so you don't get kick out or slip. Some of the other things we wanted to do is put a stainless steel insert in here. So the 5/16 threaded rod actually is running up against, so you've got a steel bolt going up against a stainless steel insert. So as you're torquing against the tree and going in and out, that's not going to wear out. So that's another thing that we wanted to do.
The arms itself is aluminum, I'm assuming?
It's all 6061 T6, black anodized. The individual posts that are in here, the bolts that were used, so those are a little heavier duty. That's actually a 3/8 bolt in there. And this is really where your stability comes in, at each one of these posts as you extend. We tested out to 10 pounds. Now, obviously, most people aren't going to be running a 10-pound camera, but we wanted to try to test against, 10 pounds out on this end and not getting a lot of flex or reverberation in that arm after you moved. So that was our basis for why we designed it the way we did. These lengths are all the same. So there is the ability, if one wanted to go, 1, 2, 3, and put a fourth section in here, they could, and then pair it. This would be your fourth section with the adapter end on it. Now, I will say with that, when you get out to length and you have a larger camcorder, you're going to get some flex, right? Because it's just, It's just the dynamic of what happens when you get weight extended out over that amount of range. So this gives the perfect balance between that. Um, so any standard size camcorder that you run, like I have a G30, a Canon G30, it works perfectly with that. I also ran cell phones a lot, so had an extra iPhone that I ran. The iPhone 13s and up, their lenses actually don't do half bad in low light. Still nowhere near as good as, your upper end camcorders, or obviously your larger camera equipment that has a really advanced lens on there. I'm not a professional videographer by any stretch of the imagination, but
Sure.
at a basic sense, the larger the lens you have, the larger the iris you have on that lens, it's going to bring in more light. You're going to get better footage in that last 15 minutes. So that's kind of the game that people play. Cell phones are great for doing that. There's a lot of nice mounts you can buy actually to use a cell phone, and it's convenient because you already have it. The battery life is really good. But low light, like I said, the newer phones do much better with it. Uh,
And
you
did I
know,
see, is
and
there like a gear hook on the bottom under the bracket too or something?
Yep. So you can hang a bag here. There's a gear hook here to hang a bag on. This actually threaded post. So people ask about this threaded nut. There's actually, so this is a quarter 20. Most of your heads that come with will have an adapter that goes from a quarter 20 to a 3/8, or you can actually buy a double-headed bolt. Mark Doring just posted a video on a double-headed adapter that goes from quarter 20 to 3/8 or quarter 20 to 3/16. You can have options there. Um, I'm going to do some research on kind of sourcing those in bulk, so I could probably provide those for people if they need them. But what I recommend with most people, if you're going to go with a different option than that, there is an adapter you can buy that'll thread right on here. We left this loose primarily because I knew that people had different types of camera heads. If we would have Loctited this in, then it would have sort of locked people into having this in there, and they would have had to take it out. So I do recommend, if you're going to use this post, to fix it in a position, Loctite it. Then it's not going to move around on you. Get the adapter that fits with your camera head. Most camera heads that you buy come with an adapter, whether it's already got a quarter 20 or it's sizing up to a 3/8. So some arms come with the 3/8 and then the adapter down to the quarter 20, depending on what's being used. So
Yeah, I feel like for a mobile setup, quarter 20 is probably the way to go though, because most of the heads you're going to be using are the smaller types. You're not using a big like studio level Manfrotto header on there or something. I guess what head are you using, or do you have a preference? Anything?
So I don't have it sitting by me, but I actually use a couple different ones. Like if I'm just using my cell phone one, um, it can attach right to here.
Okay.
Um, Broken Arrow has a bunch of mounts that are pretty good. That have a variety of like magnetic mounts for cell phones, as well as ones that clip onto there that are pretty slick to use. I use a trigger head. John Kitchka, a friend of Dan's, he has a site where he sells like a trigger based one. Now that's a little bit heavier head. I've just grown used to it. I know a lot of people use a regular fluid head with an arm, so I've bought one of those, and I'm testing it out and trying to get the feel for it. I like the trigger one because I can grip it, move the camera in position, let it go, and then I'm just used to it. It's just
Sure.
something that I've used for so long that I've just adapted to it. But I'll probably, try out some different heads with it.
Yeah, I use it is Manfrotto, but it's their smallest one, and it's not technically a fluid head, but it operates like one. It's called a Be Free, and I think those are like, don't quote me, 79, 89 bucks. And for the typical camera size you're running in a mobile setup, that's worked real well for me. I mean, you wouldn't run a 10 or 15 pound camera on it, but something that's 1 to 4, your typical handy cams or whatever, it works real well for those.
Yeah, I feel like if if you're doing really high end footage and bringing, this will easily fit. If you're getting a smaller DSLR with a smaller lens on it, you'll be okay. Um, you start getting a bigger telephoto lens and a bigger DSLR, your weight's going to increase, and then your stability at length is going to decrease. So it's all that trade-off factor. So this is a good option because it's right in the middle of being compact, but also stable for those mid-range sized cameras.
And I don't know if it mattered either ways. I'm just asking because I'm curious. Is that water jetted also, or is that CNC'd?
These are all machined.
Okay.
So yeah. And you'll see that on the finish. These 3 parts are actually the same material parts. So these are extruded. And that was one of the design features, just that we wanted to do. So it was interchangeable.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, it's got a nice little profile though. So for packing up, and then
Yes, this will slip right into your jean pocket. Obviously, this side of it is not going to fit in your pocket, but again, the trade-off with the profile of it being stable on a tree.
yeah. Well, and I know a lot of people, like myself included, a lot of times I just bungee stuff to my stand. So the fact that it's got a bunch of holes just to tie it down, that's pretty handy too.
Yeah, and you can get creative with, if you use paracord loops or whatever else you want to put on here. I have had a lot of questions. Could people use it to hang their bow? Obviously, on public land, they don't have to, actually set it to, and really from guys that, hang their bow or hang their crossbow. My recommendation, if they're going to do that, I mean, you're not going to be able to do it out at full length because of the weight of some bows.
Yeah,
But you
crossbow,
can
especially, those get pretty heavy.
yeah, especially for those. But you could use it for that if you wanted to set it up over top, and then you've got basically an articulating arm to do it. Um, there's a variety of options that you could do if you removed one of these bolts. I mean, it's kind of limitless as far as putting together a hook that could go on here for that. So
Yeah, that was my first thought. Maybe put a hook 3 or 4 holes out from the base on the first arm section. That'd be pretty
Yep.
handy.
Yeah, you could use it for that.
Well,
So,
it's April, Mario, so we got a lot of turkey chatter in the audience comments here. So I'd be curious to know if you're doing any turkey hunting. I'm not a big turkey hunter, and I'm a terrible turkey hunter, admittedly. I haven't spent a lot of time doing it. So you got a tag, and if you do, maybe give me some of your tactics or your general approach to hunting turkeys.
well, my general approach is I find a lot of areas that I want to turkey hunt in, and then when I go out, I end up doing a lot of deer scouting.
Yeah.
I do have a tag. I have my season is next week. Hopefully, I mean, they've been moving around here all right. I haven't seen as many birds as I normally see. So I kind of travel. So I'll go to the northern part of the state, like northeast area, and then I'll kind of span all the way back to the central part of the state. Last year I actually bought, because there was several, you could buy bonus tags. You wait in line online
Okay.
and get bonus tags. So I bought tags for a couple different areas, primarily because I wanted to scout areas in the central part of Wisconsin. I think, I do have access to a couple areas to hunt on private. So always having that in the back pocket is fun. I think the challenge becomes is that, it's a waiting game. It's a waiting game a lot of times on small private lots, versus actually spotting and stalking and working a bird in. My tactics aren't that revolutionary from what others do. I've learned from a lot of other good turkey hunters. So a basic tactic of, in the evening, try to watch and look for where they're roosting in the evening to try to get a good idea of where they're roosting. We use owl calls and other things to get them to call back, and then try to sneak back in there in the morning and get them when they drop down. That's a tactic that I've used before. I'll not say that I've been incredibly successful at doing that. I mean, I've had more times than not when birds, I've been underneath them where they're roosting within close proximity, and they pitch and fly a good distance away from me, where I can't get a shot on them, and then I end up bumping them off the area that I'm hunting or have access to. That's what's kind of fun about finding a large stretch of public if you can hunt that. And by large stretch, I mean several hundred acres, or even in some cases, some of these public stretches are, over 1,000 acres. If you can just wander, um, is that where you can get on birds and see them, sight them, and then try to work your way around them. Sometimes it takes, getting in your vehicle and driving to the complete opposite side of the property, then coming back in and trying to cut them off, um, and so forth. I haven't had, I have used decoys in the past. I've had success sitting on a decoy and calling them into a decoy, but that's been primarily because knowing the travel path, right? Knowing the pattern of travel where I've seen them, I've watched them walk that pattern of travel like the night before, that typical migration pattern that they're taking, either to go back to the roost in the evening or where they pitch down and they come out. I've had, and there's probably other guys that are much better turkey hunters on here that have experienced the whole scenario where um, they'll be locked up with hens on one side of the field and your hen is over there sitting all alone. Um, and they're expecting the hen to come to them. And
Right.
no matter how great of a caller you are, you can't pull them. Tend to get, I mean, to be quite honest, I tend to get a little impatient because I like to move around. I mean, I've had scenarios where I'm calling, I'm getting calls back, and I'm tucked in, and I had turkeys move up a fence line on me, and I go to kind of peek out because I want to see where they're at, and they're literally like right there, and I spook them off. So I have fun with it. It's a good time of the year to get out, good break from all the commotion and everything going on. So
Yeah, I got first world problems in Montana because turkey season opened Monday, but so did spring bear. So this weekend, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I haven't killed either in Montana, but I'm admittedly a very fair weather, not very serious turkey hunter. So I've probably been out, I don't know, 6 times, 7 times in 5 years. I don't get after them too much, but I would like to shoot a bear, so I might get out after the bears this weekend.
yeah, I typically don't have a problem seeing turkeys, actually getting them in range. The year before last, I shot one. Last year, I did a lot of walking, did a lot of scouting, um, saw a few birds from a distance. But the one turkey I encountered that was not alive was a pile of bones and dead.
Yeah.
Uh, so I used to get a bunch of turkeys before they built all the houses up behind my house. There were several turkeys that would come into the woods in the open air. There used to be like a 40-acre wooded / field area that was behind me that they've now developed, but that would get a lot of turkeys in there. They used to come and come right into my backyard, and all the clucks would come in and hang out on the patio. And then, so I had a funny time. One time in my backyard, the neighbor's black cat sat in the middle of the yard, and it would just sit there perfectly still and whip its tail. And all the hens would be like, "Oh," because they were protecting the brood, and the cat was having way too much fun with that. But so
Sounds like we're in the same boat. My only real encounter last year, I heard a bunch of hens. So I got positioned and they came right in perfect, like 15 yards. They walked right by me. And it was the peak, goblin season. There was no Tom with it. So I don't know what was going on there. It's like, how are all these birds alone? But it happens. So,
yeah.
speaking of turkey hunting, deer hunting, running a business, I think you're a good guy to talk to about balancing your time, effective time management. You seem to be real good at that. So there's guys out there that are struggling with that. Give me some good tips of how you manage your time, especially this time of year when it's easy to forget about deer season and that stuff. And I guess I'd be curious to know the time that you do have free right now to allocate towards deer. What are you doing with that time?
Yeah, I think it definitely is a year over year process where you have to build, for me anyways, in the situation that I'm in with, I have a lot of stuff going on with family and my kids. My kids are in sports. I enjoy watching their athletics and being part of that. Um, you know, obviously you have opportunities and things going on with the business. So I think it's about building a library of areas, and I've said this before, areas that you scout, um, areas that you know you're going to go locate, visit, and hunt, right? So freshen up on them. Um, but also, there's a big part of this that's building a network and a community of friends and people that you can lean on to get information. So I think having a group of fellow hunters, there's a big part of hunting that is a solitude activity. It's actually an aspect of it that I really enjoy as well. It is a time to get away and just immerse yourself back into the outdoors. I do spend a lot of time staring at my 3 computer screens and things like that. But so I think building those relationships and those connections, and that happens over a period of time. Talk to people, build relationships to people, ask about getting access. You probably need to have, I think if you've got a really busy schedule and you're working a lot, um, it's not bad to try to get access to some private land in addition to, your regular public spots. Um, and I'll extend, I'll have areas obviously that are my go-to areas within an hour of my house, but then there's always areas that are 2 hours and 3 hours away. And there's some areas that I scouted 2 years ago and built a list and took notes, right, on what all these areas were, how we accessed them, what we found, the times that we did go hunting, what was the pressure like. Um, and then I'll go back and revisit those places and hunt them or scout them, primarily because I know during this time of the year is the best time to get out and scout, undeniably. But with a busy schedule, I'm not always going to be able to take an entire weekend and go scout, spend 2 whole days scouting. There is a definite advantage to being able to do that. But I think you really got to look at your goals and what you want to achieve and adjust become a little bit different too. I think some of the anxiety that hunters have or that anyone has with anything that you're doing is, set your expectations and your goals in accordance to what you're able to accomplish and do, and then prioritize that accordingly. And typically, if you do that, you're going to come out feeling happy about what the outcome is, right? I think hunting in general, it's like any pursuit that you're doing. If you're observing the people that are successful year after year, um, they're putting in a lot of time. They're making it a priority in their life, right? And that means, it's no secret that a lot of these guys are spending a lot of time scouting. They're spending a lot of time journaling, observing. When you hear about people that are tracking a specific set of bucks or 1 or 2 bucks or a grouping of bucks, or they're monitoring a bedding area, um, that it takes time. Make no doubt about it that those folks that are doing that and they're watching the behavior of those animals in that area, it takes time to do that. Now you can shortcut that with use of some cameras and doing some other things, the mapping tools that are available now. I take advantage of the mapping tools now. If I do kind of one technique that I use is if I'm traveling somewhere, my head is often on a swivel. Like I'll see a stretch of property in the distance, and I'll pop open my phone, pop open Spartan Forge, and I'll scroll through to the spot and I'll just drop a pin. And then if I have time, I'll come back and physically look at it like boots on the ground, or just see like, is it open to hunting or who owns that? Or I'll for sure go and look on the map and start looking at the topography and look at what sign may show itself on the map online. I think that's a huge advantage and a time saving. Um, the other thing that I did this year with a lot of the predictability that's in that Spartan Forge app is I found myself like looking at that where it tells you whether or not the deer are going to be traveling in transition or in full range or in normal range. Um, and those, again, it's all data, right? We're all data collectors as hunters. I have a journal that runs back like 15 years where I take basic information down, what's the weather? What's the wind? Okay. What was the weather like? How was kind of the feel of the woods? What did I see? What did I observe while I was walking in? So I'll go back and reread those journals for all those areas that I focused on. And that kind of gets me into the mood. It gets my mind thinking about what I need to be observing when I'm walking into these areas. And then now just combining that with the, some of the advancements in technology, it it can help you take a window if you've got a small window to hunt to really focus in on those couple days where your movement, right, in a specific area is going to be highest. So by what I mean by that, the deer are going to be getting up maybe earliest in the evening and they're going to be traveling the furthest from their core area statistically, right? Um, and then just going based on past history. The one thing I've noticed about specific areas is that deer can be very habitual in the way that they move, and not just specific deer if you're hunting, like I said, a specific buck or a group of animals, but once you understand how they travel through a property, that pattern tends to hold, I would say, year over year for a couple years, all things being equal, right? And I say that with, if you get a change in the topography, let's say logging takes place, or let's say you get a large ash die off and you get buckthorn that grows up, or you get some change in the topography, then the deer pattern is going to change, right? But for that couple years, you're going to see a certain pattern. Maybe you have a young growth forest area, right? In that second to third year, when it gets those immature trees that are 6 to 8 feet, um, that can create, a bedding area or an access area or a staging area that maybe the previous 2 years you didn't see deer there. So I start to look for areas like that are going to be hot for a couple seasons, and then it'll mature and the pattern's going to change and you have to move on. Um, the other factor I tell myself in this is that, I kind of bring it back to when I was a kid, you know, when you didn't have all the fancy technology and you didn't have all this stuff. It's fun just to go out and pit yourself against your senses and what you're seeing boots on the ground. So I think some of our anxiety that we get with hunting is that, we maybe wanna we set the bar too high. You shoot a couple nice deer, maybe you haven't shot a nice deer yet and you wanna get there, that's great. Then there's a ton of resources to put all the pieces together to do that. I think you gotta ask yourself, how do you define success? What is a successful season to you? Is that I need to shoot, the biggest buck of my life every year and keep building on it? Or is it more about, did you travel into new areas? Did you hunt different spots that you never thought you would hunt? Did you get outside your comfort zone? I mean, for me, part of it is the adventure aspect of it. This year I did hunt a lot of the same areas, but I hunted them differently, right? From a different part out of necessity, right? Because the patterns changed. Um, but partly because I wanted to try something new. It gets monotonous if you're hunting the same areas and you're hunting them the same way. It sort of takes the whole fun out of this game. So I think throwing yourself into a new piece of property, even if you haven't scouted it to where you think is satisfactory, there's a lot of fun in that because there's the unknown. You don't know what's there. You don't have anything on camera. You haven't observed anything on hoof. You're walking into these areas and you're looking for sign, and you're observing what you see, and then the next night you pivot. The next morning you pivot and you kind of hunt your way down. I find that I'm having to do that a lot more now with a busy schedule than I did in the past when I had more time to pre-scout and plan and so forth. So,
And it only takes one time of scouting a new area or adventure hunting and seeing a big buck for that to get in your blood. I feel like, because I'm almost to the point now where I have a hard time going back to anywhere that I've been before, just because I like to gamble. It's like, oh, what's at that spot? What's at the next spot? What's at the next spot? So it gets addictive. At least for me, it has been.
Yeah, and there is a lot more people getting out and about, and it's great. People are getting into areas where they normally wouldn't venture into. I think so. You just make sure your expectations are set right, and you won't be disappointed. It doesn't mean just because you go into an area and you find human sign that someone's been there, doesn't mean the area is completely uh, soiled or it isn't going to be a good hunt. You have to think about, well, how are those people accessing the area? What are they doing to pressure these deer differently? Because the deer are going to adjust, right? They're going to adjust to that human pressure, and they're going to find a way to work around those people. And if you understand the human behavior and how they're typically accessing it, and you think outside the box a little, right? So you change. I always think about change your access if you're able to do it. Wind bearing, right? Can you access it differently? Okay. How are you setting up? You know, are other people limited by their setup or their location? Um, don't bucket yourself into hunting into one style. My buck this year, that's you can see its head sitting on the back wall there. Um, the morning before, I had set up in a location, you know, did a hang and hunt, set up, had the wind a certain way. I had 3 bucks come in. They rotated in downwind of me actually, and this area I basically observed for I don't know if I'd ever seen this really before, but the doe were bedding south of this island that I was on, and they were actually coming to this island to be bred. I had more than one doe come to the island that were presenting. Um, and it just so happened the way that I set up, the wind was a little bit off. I thought I set up right with the wind coming to my face over my back shoulder. But the way that the bucks were approaching this island, they were wrapping the back east side of it. And I actually had 2 bucks come in, but they both winded me with a doe sitting right in front of me. Um, so, the tree stand, I decided that I was going to come back in there the next morning. I wanted to minimize everything, so I actually left my set in there. Uh, when I got in there in the morning, the wind was shifting, and it was not. It was doing more what it was doing the previous day, and I didn't like that because I felt the same scenario was going to play out. I felt I was going to get set up in there. So now I'm faced with this conundrum. I chose to leave my set in the tree. All right. The mobile hunters, no, right? We have
Yeah.
all these things that goes through our head. So I decided to sit on the ground about 60 yards away from where my set was. Um, And it was funny because when I first sat on the ground, I was looking for cover and I was like, okay, this seems okay. But I'm like, no, I'm a little bit out in the open. Don't get lazy here. And I looked over and I found where there was a big fallen tree up against another tree. So I snuck up in there and just tucked myself up in that fallen tree. And lo and behold, right at daybreak, I had a really small buck chasing a doe cyclically, like into the marsh, back out of the marsh, into the marsh, back out of the marsh. The doe tried to turn and actually come down a very slim trail that was in my direction. She put the brakes on about from me to the wall away and almost ran me over. So I was like, that was pretty cool. She darted off. The small buck, like he came trucking by because he didn't know any better. I think I could have reached out and like smacked him in the butt. He was so close. And then that 11 pointer that I have up on the wall, about 15 minutes later, there in this area, there's like a thicket, a buckthorn that shrouds the backside of this island, if you can picture that. And that backside that was open, again, was creating like a protective cove. So the doe could get up out of the bedding. They could work their way to the island protected by this shroud of buckthorn. And then the bucks would wrap the downwind side, right? Or they would cruise from bedding area to bedding area. So this buck, I presume like he was angling on his way back to a bedding area that was significantly further north. Again, this is my estimation. And he cut across this island to check out if there was any doe on that island, and it was his demise. So he popped out literally 15 yards in front of me, and I shot him right on the ground. And
That's awesome. It's always fun shooting them on the
yeah,
ground.
yeah. So that's a lot of fun being up close and personal to them. Again, one of those things where you just have to adjust on the fly because that was the best scenario that was presented to me. So that's what I did.
Well, I want to touch on something that you mentioned in there, and that's goals and setting your goals appropriately and, proportionate to the time you have. So what are your goals being a busy man going into this fall? What are you hoping to accomplish?
What am I hoping to accomplish?
Yeah.
Really from, the type of animal that I want to shoot. It's for me, it's really about the experience. And I know that might kind of sound like a generic answer. I think I understand fully to really get on some of these big whitetails that are in my surrounding area that there's a process to that. And that process starts like literally, as the season is still going on in the previous season. So I did spend quite a bit of time, after I shot my buck. I do gun hunt, I do muzzleloader hunt, but those areas that I gun hunt and muzzleloader hunt in, because I have a passion for bow hunting during that time of the year, I, s- I have spent that time scouting and figuring things out for the next season, right? I leave my cameras soak for a long time um, through that, late January, then go out and grab them just to get extra intel on how deer are moving. Now, granted, those patterns are going to change seasonally. Um, so, this year I'm looking to, if I could shoot the same caliber buck as I did last year, I'd be perfectly happy. For me, last year I saw 6 different bucks that were within shooting range that I passed before I shot this one. And they were all decent animals, right? Again, it's all based on kind of what your own goals are.
Sure.
So did I know there were larger bucks in the area? Yes. So is that why I chose to kind of hold out, based on the time period? Yes, because I was hunting down a couple specific bucks that I knew were in the area. I had a really good idea where they were bedding. Now, timeline wise, I shot that buck the Sunday before the gun opener. And typically here in Wisconsin, a lot of patterns change, obviously, once gun season happens. And then after that, if I haven't tagged out on something, um, I really feel like my next best opportunity is, is going to be in areas that allow for that late season, right? Those late season hunts where they start to herd up and you start to look at different types of food sources and the patterns change. Um, I've had success seeing bigger animals during those times. Now you're combating the cold weather and you're combating other stuff, but there's a lot of advantages because people typically stop going out in the woods when it's very, very bitter cold.
You read my mind.
And
A lot of people have thrown in the towel by then. A lot of people.
yeah, so that's always in my back pocket. But my time is limited running up to gun season. So I don't have specific animals. I mean, I historically in the areas that I hunt and I run cameras, like I know of deer that are in those areas. But for me, I really make an assessment as the season goes on. I love to hunt that first week of the season. There are specific areas that I like to hunt. I've said this before. Specific food source patterns around acorns, around travel, around bedding. And, if the opportunity presents itself and that buck, basically makes me feel a certain way when I'm on stand, then I make that decision, right? Now, it's different if I have a history with that animal. As the summer goes on, I will get out and I'll start driving around. I'll start doing some glassing when I have time. And a lot of that is proximity glassing because, you're typically glassing on a lot of private areas, and it's where that you don't have access to, and there's proximity to public. So you're trying to figure out, based on the bedding areas that that are in public, where and how can that buck be bedded. And that you can do that. I have friends that do that very successfully, where they pinpoint where beds are, and they know when that buck shows up in this field that there's a good probability that they're bedding in these 3 areas, and then they go hunt those down. So I kind of have a historical backlog of those, along with friends that will give me tips to go here, there, and everywhere, to try spots out. So I will do that first week, and I'd love to be able to shoot a nice buck in that first week. But then as the season goes on, it's really about putting in the work. I mean, each opportunity I get to go out, I want to think from the mindset of doing just as much scouting as I am hunting, and try to, not get into the pattern of I'm just going out and I'm sitting to hunt.
Right.
That use that time wisely. Like, you might skip 2 nights of actually bow in hand hunting, because you can use that time to go scout a new area. And during the season, the sign might be changing depending on, what time of the year you're in. So you can go start checking out those areas and vetting out that sign.
It's hard to
So
do in season too. That's one of the things I like to do, though, is spend some time scouting. And I mean, out west, especially, because you could sit in an area, or you can spot and stalk, and you might cover a couple miles. But if you drive around and you got a spotting scope, it's like I could cover a lot of ground and get a lot. And a lot of times out here, it's just about finding an animal you want to go after. And a big part of that is spending some time behind the glass, or not just sitting somewhere waiting.
There is an obsession part of this that, and you'll see this pattern with, again, people that are successful with anything, but it's locking in on when you get really good sign, or you put eyes on an animal, or you go into an area and you see, if you see an animal moving through an area, at that moment, like, don't take it for granted. Really ask yourself, and I know this has been repeated a lot, but really ask yourself, why is that animal here? And what is bringing that buck to this area? Why is he behaving the way he is? What is the wind doing, right? How is the layout of the topography? Is there rises? Is there dips? Is there something unique about this that's bringing him there? Is there a subtle food source that that you're not seeing or recognizing? So I think once you have that encounter, or you have that sighting, it's really focusing in on the mechanics of why that animal is there. Now, again, I'll say this, there is no substitution for having time to go out. I think what scouting during this time of the year does, and scouting areas where you can walk all over and take a look at bedding areas, without really doing a lot of harm to them, right? And typically, some of the bedding areas in the lowlands and the swamps, deer are vacating those those areas right now, because they're full of water, and they might be areas that they only come to during certain times of the year, because the way that the does migrate, right, or the way that the food source changes. So one thing to think about when you're out scouting now is the sign that you're seeing now, right? Um, is it sign from bedding, or sign from activity that was because that's where they were at in the winter? Or was it sign that was from the previous season rut patterns, or pre-rut patterns, right? Um, is it an early season haunch where they come because there's acorns dropping, or there's another food source adjacent, like a crop field, right? Uh, or have you found, sort of what I would consider you know, the great, highly secure area that provides a lot of cover, difficult to access, has typically for the animal has a wind and a sight advantage to some extent. And you get some other indication, whether you've got pictures of this animal being in there, you physically bump the animal out of the area. Because I think when you're first starting in this, whenever I take someone new out that wants to come and go scouting in the spring, they're always amazed at how much hair and poop and beds you find. You find a bed here, you find a bed there, and what you have to realize is, you always have to ask the question why. Like, be an investigator, because no, you're going to find sign. It's just these areas are very specific to the time of the year, and the why they're there and the when they're there are the important factors. And if you watch a lot of the videos on the beast, or you look at the overall beast community and you listen carefully to a lot of the stories that people tell about the bucks that they kill, there is typically a pattern that you'll see with the when and the why, and how they laid eyes on this buck and what the buck was doing, coming to that area. Now, of course, during the rut, we know these deer travel a lot, but I mean, I was observing animals that were traveling upwards of over a mile when they started to cruise, right? And to check on various doe bedding areas, and when they started to get much more active. But up until that, these animals were, and this is based on, anecdotal sighting information, actual physical hunts that I did, and then data that I got off cameras. Up until that, they were staying very tight in a core area, and not moving out of that core bedding area, which it always seems like for us public land guys, we're always walking farther to get closer to what we feel like is this really recluse area. But then the adjacent property, has direct access to it on the backside or something. So these deer are being pressured in a certain way, and they're going to those areas. So once you figure out your access, your timing of the year of when you need to go in, then you can not overhunt an area. You can slide in and hunt it at the right time of the year, when you're going to get peak movement, peak Y, whether it's they're moving in because it's time of the year when they're starting to seek doe, or they're moving in because it's a time of the year where a food source is popped that they want to take advantage of. And then, human pressure. Deer know when people start to migrate in the woods, and they change their patterns. And if you understand that, you can capitalize on it too. So that was a really long, messy answer to
No,
what my plan is.
no, a lot of good
The
points.
plan is to hunt.
Yeah.
To hunt as much as I can without disrupting the rest of the stuff I got going on. Yeah.
The be aware of what you're looking at now is relevant to me specifically, because this past weekend I had Friday off, so I was out for 3 days looking for elk sheds, because turkey didn't open yet and bear wasn't open, so it's one of the last good weekends to get out and shed hunt before. Your area is probably starting to green up too. Mine is starting to green up, so this is one of the last good areas. But the whole point of this story is the first area that I was in, I walked 2 different areas, 6 miles each day, and I was seeing sign, but all the sign was old, and you can tell that by the age of the droppings. It's pretty dry out here. They're pretty dried out. You step on them, they look like a cocoa puff, and instead of like a grape, they're not soft in the middle. And I was seeing rubs, so it's pretty apparent to me. Oh, this sign was fall, early winter. Those elk aren't here anymore. Any tracks that I saw were super, the edges weren't crisp anymore or whatever. And then Sunday I went to a completely different area, I don't know, 50 miles away, in an area that I hadn't been in, but I wanted to check out. And when I got back to this area, a couple mile walk to get in there, but where I thought the elk would be based on the terrain, and there's some water sources there, which is important in the spring, And so I get out there, and I see a bunch of tracks right away, and they're big. And anybody that's ever elk hunted, it's pretty easy to tell a bull track from a cow track because a big bull elk will almost look like cattle, but it's narrower, but the length, it's a really big track. And you can just tell. So I'm like, oh, there's bulls in here, and there's bulls in here right now because these tracks, the snow's just melted off in the last week or so, and they're crisp, they're defined. So if they would been before the snow, they'd be starting to get softer on the edges and flattened out and everything. Well, not long after that, I found a shed. It was older, but this is obviously a place that I'll spend some time in the spring. And then my girlfriend was with me, and half hour later, she jumped 3 bulls that were all shed and had, they're already growing fuzz back. So
Nice.
it was just a good point to keep in what you said, and I thought worth mentioning. Keep in mind what you're seeing, and you're right, be the detective. Like, it was pretty obvious to me in the first spot because I spent a lot of time outdoors that sign was older, and I wasn't going to find a shed because there's no elk there now. And the second spot, as soon as I saw all those fresh tracks and bull tracks, you can bet I was looking real hard because they were there, and they were there right now.
Yeah, another big factor too, just by putting boots on the ground, and even and obviously the closer you get to the season, the less you want to be disrupting close to, for me, it again all revolves around those bedding areas and those food sources, right? Like, you don't want to get close to it and disrupt it, get your scent in there, do any sort of pre-setup or anything, right? You want the element of surprise. But by walking it now and walking it during times where um, you're less disruptive to when those animals are living there during that core time of the year, especially when the foliage is down, you can get a sense of navigating the area, right? It's going to give you confidence when you go back to it. Because when all the foliage grows up and you've got, you know, brush and bush that's up over the top of your head, um, things are going to look different.
Totally
Where,
different world out there, especially in the swamp.
yeah, where
Yeah.
you intended to set up isn't going to look the same. Uh, so, but that being said, if you walk those areas and you mark off those visual cues, maybe a change in topography, a change in the type of trees, um, that's going to give you confidence when you go back in there, because you'll have that visual imprint in your mind on how it lays out and how you want to approach it. So a lot of the walking that I do, if I walk an area, I think a lot about, if I'm going to hunt it, how would I approach this, or how would I get access to this during the year where I'm not going to bump an animal. So
Yeah, now is the time to answer those questions. Not when you get out there and the cattails are 6 foot tall and you can't remember exactly what. Let's talk about that. I'm a big note taker. I don't think Dan takes a lot of notes. How about you? The more, especially the more states and spots that I've hunted, the more important those notes have become to me because I'm getting old. I think my brain's getting mushy, and I don't always remember. I mean, I'll remember the area, but I don't remember specifics or exactly what tree or exactly what wind without the notes. So I know you said you journal. Are you taking a lot of notes that you're referring back to also?
yeah, so I try to journal, at least if I go out and scout or hunt. I have a Google Doc, a simple Google Doc that I like to, within a day of doing it, I like to go back and take down those basic, you know, weather metrics, sighting metrics, sign that I might have saw, and then a brief description of what the outing was like. And then I like to bring up a map and capture a screenshot of the map of where I was at, and then draw on it. Draw like where I think travel is going to be, what I was thinking in my head. Um, I've done some of that within the mapping tools. I think, sometimes I'll send myself a text with the information. Sometimes I'll do a voice recording. Um, as the challenge becomes, and I find this like during the meat of the season, when I have those times where I can hunt every single day, um, I'm in that mode where I'm hunting. So I'm hunting, I'm hunting, I'm hunting, I'm hunting. And then all of a sudden I got 5 days that I got to journal on and keep up on. So I think having an efficient way to do it. Um, Obviously, some of these memories, they always stick vividly in your mind. But as time goes on, the memory of what actually happened starts to
Gets fuzzy.
transform a little.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So that's why I like the journal, because you're documenting like what you're seeing and what you actually saw and what you think at the moment, and it's especially useful for the areas that you don't get back to and hunt every single year. And I have areas on the other side of the state and in the central part of the state that are like that. Like depending on what's going on in my core area, I might not get to those spots and hunt because I'm on deer and I'm happy with chasing those deer locally. So I don't take the trip and go out and chase the deer that are 3 hours away. Right. Um, so then being able to go back and read what I was doing, what I was thinking in those previous years. Now, obviously things change, so that's not going to be 100% accurate. But also taking in information from close friends that you have that hunt in different areas. What are they saying? I mean, this is what this whole community kind of does now. There's a lot of information that's posted online, a lot of things that are going on with deer movement and what people are seeing. So, um, take note of that stuff. Where are people seeing deer, or what are you reading online? Uh, and that can help you as well. So,
A lot of great insights. We got some questions here from the chat, so we'll start taking some questions here for 10, 20 minutes, and then we'll wrap it up. And want to say thanks again before we wrap it up, Mario, for coming on and filling in
yeah,
for Dan. Always good to have you on, and I always appreciate your insights. So, veteran outdoorsman says, "Who hasn't sacked Tom Brady?" I think that was a Derrick Wolf reference. I was laughing when I saw that.
nice,
Yeah.
nice,
Oleg Chernenko says, "Who is this guy? About time Dan let you out in public." I think he's referring to you.
nice.
Uh, Austin Phillips says, "Holy F, it's Mario." So I think people are missing you, Mario.
Thank you.
So, yeah. Bo Mad Outdoors says, "So Hunting Beast now has the lightest ever camera arm?" Question mark. I don't know if it's the lightest ever, but it's got to be.
It's just under 2 pounds. It's not the lightest one out there. But it's a good balance between something that's going to support a bigger camera, but also be small enough to kind of fit in your pack. And it's definitely a lot lighter than the original Beast camera arm, which is what we were shooting for.
What that one weighed? Any idea? 4 pounds, 6 pounds, 8 pounds?
I think it was like around 4 pounds.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, you know, I'm not getting any younger. So the less weight and here's the other thing too. I love working out and training. I've said, talked about this before. Many of you do, right? You're into fitness, you're into outdoors. So I do spend a lot of time in the off season, working out. And I work out every day. I love doing sauna. I love still pushing myself physically as long as my body enables me to do it. So I think that's another factor that's super important in the heat of the season. If you want your mind to be sharp, you want your faculties to be sharp. If you can stay in good physical condition, like I haven't elk hunted, I've just done hikes out west. But when you're in elevation and you're climbing up and down hills, if you're hunting in western Wisconsin, if you're sloshing through a swamp and you're dealing with all that uneven ground, so I do a lot of training that tries to simulate that uh, type of stress on my body. So, because I know once the season is going around and my kids have sporting activities and things are going on with work and everything else, um, something has to be sacrificed there. So if you're out in the woods hunting, you're probably not training your body. So I use this time in the off season to build my body up and try to get it as healthy as possible.
No, that's great advice. And I tell my Midwestern friends, a lot of them, for a fair amount of them, have come out to hunt with me. And they're like, "What do I need? What gear do I need? Blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Listen, your success out here, 100%, the better shape you're in, the higher your odds are. Because the number one thing is spending time on your feet. And, that's I always tell them, you be in shape and have good boots, because that's the best thing you can do to have success out here, because you just need to cover a lot of ground." So, Elizabeth Williams says, "Mario, are you going to make a beast bow hanger?"
A beast bow hanger,
Yeah,
possibly.
possibly.
What do you want? Like, what is your idea of a ideal bow hanger? Because a lot of people have there's a lot of stuff out there. There's little widgets that strap to the tree. There's hangers that obviously are traditional hangers that are pegs that come out. Like what?
Yeah, so let's get some feedback, and we'll look for that towards the end of the question session
Sure.
here, or we'll get that tomorrow. Jacob Nolting says, I have found many buck beds and marshes this year, but I'm struggling to figure out their entrance and exit routes. What are some good tips for determining their direction of travel?
Good question. Well, typically, I say typically, maybe I tread lightly on that because I'm of the belief that there's no guarantee often, but I think if you think about the trail that they're getting up in an evening scenario and going out to feed or going out to move at night, that trail is typically going to be the heaviest trail, right? Um, if they're bedding in that specific location, and it might be multiple beds in an area, they're going to bed based on the common principles of, sight, sound, safety. So wind, right? Thermals, their line of sight. Now in a marsh, you might say, well, what are they seeing? They're down in the cattails. It's true, but if you sit in those buck beds and you're looking for the nearest high ground, there is some sight that they get out of that, right? But a lot of it's sound, all right? And a huge part of it is wind. So that area that they're getting up and walking out of every night and they start to feel comfortable, that typically, can be your heaviest trail. Now, if you think about when a buck comes back in to enter that bed, um, it's not 100%, but a lot of times they're going to hook that bed or try to wrap downwind of it or try to wrap the back side of it where imagine if you were coming home every day and you had to decide whether or not there was someone in your house that was there to kill you. How would you access your house? Would you go in through the front door or in the garage like you do every day? Probably not, right? But if you think about all of your senses that you have and you're exiting the front of your house and let's say you've got cameras and everything and you know that it's safe to leave the front of your house because of your senses. This is what deer are doing. That pattern of you leaving your house every day is going to be pretty pretty beaten down and pretty defined, right? You might see I look for if it's a buck, if it's got a bigger piece of hardware on it, look for small signs, small browse on the way out. So they're feeding on the way out. They like to eat the tips of cattails. They like to eat the cattail wreaths. They'll feed on that. Look for smaller branches and things that are broken due to antler mass on the way out. Now, the way in, that's kind of where, you talk about that spokes of a wheel type of thing, because they might start coming into that bed and you might see several small faint trails that are accessing it from all different directions outside of that one main heavy trail. And the reason why that is because they don't know what went on there during the whole night while they were gone. So if they're coming back typically right before daylight, and they're getting back in there an hour before daylight, depending on the time of the year, they're checking all those senses for that bed. So they're checking the wind, they're checking sound, obviously sight is a hard factor for them to check a lot of times. So a lot of it's based on smell and sound. And that is going to vary based on what those wind and thermals are doing in the swamp. So look for the heavy trail and look for the subtle sign, small branches broken off, that provide that walking trail in and out. You'll see videos posted like this, where people are scouting. Dan has done videos like this. Other people in the beast community have done videos like this, where you kind of see this large trail coming out of a bedding area that it kind of looks like someone drove a motorbike in. Now it might not be that distinct, but I've seen it where, the cattails kind of V down and the earth is torn up, the mud is torn up from just like years of walking.
That
And
was
you
one
can
thing I
actually,
was going to mention too in the cattails. And I've seen I can't remember who said it first, if it's Dan, somebody else, but it was something I wouldn't have thought about. You can see in a regularly used exit trail that the mud will be splashed on one side of the cattails more than the other. And that's one of those small things I think a lot of people, myself included, overlooked initially, right? And that's kind of a level of detail going along with what you said about the browse, if you can tell which way it's browsed. And you guys have both talked about it before. A buck with a larger rack, a lot of times it's breaking cattails off at head height, and they're going to be laying a certain way, right? So if they're all laying going out, like you can tell that's the direction of travel. So
yeah, and
little things like that.
don't be afraid to, again, as the year goes on and it approaches the season, I don't know, where this area is or how difficult it is to access, but don't be afraid to observe it. When I listen to other very good hunters that hunt these same similar scenarios, I mean, yes, do they have scenarios where they find something like that and it's a one and done and they go in and kill? Sure. They have stories like that. But more often than not, it is they find an area like that on a hunch of where they think the travel is. They first do a killable spot, but it's sort of like a stage hunt, right? Where they're off enough, and because leading up to it, there was other sign that they wanted to try to hunt first. So if you're thinking about, first time in the season, I'm going to come into an area, and so you work your way to where you think, well, here is the best crossing point where I'm going to kill this buck or I'm going to kill what's ever coming out of there. And through that, it's like get eyes on it. Like, you know, see what gets up and comes out of there. There's no substitute for actually observing how deer move in an area because it'll enlighten you. I think when you see that pattern of how they use it, then a lot of times you're like, huh, I didn't think they were going to do that. Um, so don't be afraid to just go hunt it. But
Get your hands dirty.
yes, get your hands dirty and blow up a spot and you're going to learn something,
Pharrell asks, what are some of your favorite mapping features? Now, I don't know if he means items within like mapping software or like terrain features. So maybe touch on both a little bit.
Yes. Terrain features. When I grew up as a kid, the area in central Wisconsin had a lot of hills and lowland areas, but I hunted more farmland and the hills. I don't get to hunt those as much anymore, but I do really like hunting hills. It took me half a lifetime to get halfway good at setting up and reading some of the sign in hills. So, mapping features that can really help you see the different points and divots and things like that. We've talked about Spartan Forge before. We had Bill Thompson on. Their LiDAR maps, and being a software nerd myself and understanding, again, the LiDAR mapping, the three-dimensional patterns of, if you compare that to a standard topo map and you look at the level of definition and detail it gives you, it's
insane.
it's
just
pretty
insane.
freaking cool.
Yeah.
And now again, you got to look at like, I helped a guy scout his property out in New York, and so before we looked at any mapping stuff, and this was all online, we just talked about like all the deer he had been seeing, where he had killed, what patterns he had been looking at, and he was using another mapping software. And I said, hey, just out of curiosity, I see that there's like some really thin riverbeds here, and and we popped open split screen with the satellite and the LiDAR on one side, And it was amazing the small little definition of change in elevation that LiDAR maps brought up. And, consequently, how that matched with how the deer were moving through elevation. Because deer, deer like to use subtle elevation to travel. If they have to, they'll go through the hardest possible route, right? But in all these areas, they will tend to follow the contour of the land. You can see it on the, 1/3 the military crest on the top. You see it 1/3 up from the bottom. Typically, if you pinpoint that on a topo map, you can walk it and you're going to see deer sign, whether you're transitioning from a lowland marsh to woodland timber, or if you're on the side of the hill in steep elevation. You're typically going to find some sign there or a travel corridor. So I like that feature. I like looking at different elevation points. The other thing that I like is on a lot of the high resolution maps, sometimes you can get like 3D versions of it on Google has some of those, is you can actually pick out where you get mature blocks of trees or oaks or maples. You see like the larger, more mature foliage versus smaller high stem count areas. I kind of look at smaller high stem count areas as staging, potentially bedding areas, versus the more mature areas as areas where they're going to feed and so forth, right? In marshes, I always look for the discoloration. I mean, you can see the definition of the trails, but I look for the discoloration for the red brush or the other woody stem areas on maps like that. So I think, I can't say enough good things about Spartan Forge. When you combine that with being able to click on an area and boom, it gives me the wind, the moon phase, the weather, the travel statistics for that area, and they keep building that database. So again, whether it's going to be in a normal range, they're traveling their full range, right? That stuff helps when you got a little time window.
Yeah, I'm not a huge technology guy. As far as like, I don't use cell cams or anything, but I would trade all the technology and just go to a trad bow if I could only use LiDAR. I think it's that important. So people aren't using it. I feel like you're living in the Stone Age, because the amount of fidelity, and for people that we've talked about, we had Bill on, but people that don't know, LiDAR is light detection and ranging. And what they do is they fly either a plane, a helicopter, or a drone over an area with a laser that bounces off the ground and reflects. So you're getting super high fidelity, and it's basically X-ray vision because it goes through the trees too. And I've killed 2 deer now 100% because I found areas on LiDAR. One was an old oxbow that you couldn't otherwise see in kind of a mature timber. And I was like, well, that's gotta, one, it's got some elevation change, which you just talked about, subtle elevation change and otherwise flat stuff. And it was along a creek. And the other thing, I thought, well, if it's a little bit lower, it's probably got a little bit more water, a little bit thicker, and it had all that stuff. And I killed a buck right next to it. So that LiDAR is a game changer for sure.
And it's just a tool. It doesn't mean you need it like either. As a kid, we used to hand draw maps of areas that we'd go to and make like, this is here and estimations. You have your little key and you would draw maps and things like that. That's fun too. And getting boots on the ground and interpreting the sign and doing that over and over and over again is by far, the woodsmanship that you can build from that is by far your biggest advantage, but you can use these other tools to assist you if you don't have the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. We got Mike says, if you could only hunt one day next year, what date and location, state in parentheses, would you choose?
Oh, what state? Well, one day. I have had a lot of luck. Well, geez, that's a. So do I get any other variables? Like, do I know anything about the fuck I'm hunting? I guess I'll, if all things being equal, I would probably hunt November 7th in Wisconsin in one of the areas that I know there's like a well-known pattern. Now, that's a little bit selfish of an answer because I'm thinking of it of my probability of I have a bias because of kills and sightings and all this other stuff in my head. Now, my desire to do again, which I've done twice, is to kill again in the early season, the first 2-3 days of the season, on a bedding area adjacent to a food source, in Wisconsin, where I've patterned either an animal or a group of animals that are living there. I think that's because with that, I feel like the guys that do that, there's a lot of work that goes into it, and there's a lot of satisfaction and joy that goes into figuring out that pattern and putting it together in the early season.
Mario,
I really like hunting in that early season.
I can't disagree with a single thing you said for archery. I've killed my number 1 and number 3 bucks on November 7th, and I killed my number 2 buck on the second day of season. So I'm right there with you. And for states, I'd take Iowa or Montana, just because I think that's the best trophy potential.
Yeah. There is a solitude of, I've hunted a lot of hours in the bitter, bitter death cold in the late season in Wisconsin. There's a part of me that loves that too. Not only because of the potential you have, right? Because the patterns get really specific, but there's a physical, aspect of it where we just don't do this enough anymore. We need to do more. People need to do this. You need to go out and
Get your suffer on.
Your mind gets incredibly focused when you put yourself in the elements like that, especially, when the cold, everything becomes heightened. You hear every sound. So there's an aspect of that that's actually fun. Some people think it's crazy, but I don't know. It's fun.
We're both wearing plaid right now, but this question is: how serious are you about camouflage? Does it matter much to you, and do you match it to the hunt area or not? And that was from Pharrell.
Part of the reason why we created this plaid, and I give credit to Lou and Alan for this, Al, is, this color, obviously it's fashionable where you could wear it out of the town. But it also blends in really well with a variety of backgrounds. So I have really a hodgepodge of different hunting clothes that I've acquired over the years. So I'm not a big, got to wear the specific camo based on where I'm at. I think I want to wear something that blends in is a good, but I also recognize that, deer have specific rods and cones in their eyes, and they see color differently. I do believe, based on deer behavior, that there is something to the science around how they sense you in the field. Like, I know this is going to sound a little hocus pokey, but how they sense energy. I know people have talked about electromagnetic fields.
You got hex in that camo, that plaid, Mario? You got hex in there?
Yeah. But how different detergents reflect off of clothing and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there are things with that. But for me, it's more, are you breaking up your silhouette for the time of the year where you're, if the leaf cover is at a different tree height, I'm not gonna go 20 feet up if most of my cover is at 12 feet. I'm gonna try to shroud myself. If I have to hunt lower because that's where the cover is, or if I have to hunt lower because that's what gives me the advantage for shooting or element of surprise, then I'm going to do that. If I have to hunt on the ground, I'm going to do that. So I think camouflage, you want it to break up your silhouette. You want to be shrouded. I think you can do that with a variety of different camo. I also look at it as something you want to be comfortable, right? Be comfortable with what you're wearing. Does Does it make you comfortable? Does it give you confidence? For me, I like to wear a vest. I have a vest that's a turkey vest that has pockets shrouded on each side, um, that I always wear out with me, whether it's hot or cold, because that has pockets with all my gear in it. And I know I have a system exactly where each thing is in. So I'm not kind of fumbling around with that. I grab that thing. I got my milkweed in one pocket. I've got my call in the other. I've got my, string that I pull my bow up in the other. Everything is right there and it's always there. I got my compass there, my headlamp. Um, I'm not going to say that I don't forget to put stuff back in there, and then I end up out there in the woods sometimes but that's kind of part of my system. But I really just try to break myself up. But I wear kind of a hodgepodge of stuff a lot of times.
No, and I think you touched on a super important part there that we probably haven't discussed enough is especially if guys are just getting going, having a system, and you're going to develop that system over time through experience. But if you have a logical plan from the start, it sure is helpful because I can't tell you early days how many times I did dumb stuff hang in the stand or forgot stuff or whatever when I first started going mobile. And over the years, like you said, I've accumulated certain things in a system that works for me, and now it's pretty routine. But early on, that'll give you, speaking of anxiety in this episode, that'll give you some anxiety when you're out there and you forgot your release or your rangefinder or whatever because you didn't have a good system in place.
Yeah, I mean, clothing wise, a lot of it's weather determined. I'm someone that I sweat a ton when I know. So in the early season, I always dress very light, and if I need, long sleeves to protect myself against poison sumac or anything that likes to find me when I'm in the swamp, I'll do that, or I'll wear like a face gaiter, um, but I'll wear like a t-shirt just to dress light while I'm out there, and then put on, whatever cover jacket I have when I'm up on the stand. And then the same is true for those later parts of the year. I typically dress fairly light for my travel out. So I don't overheat. I don't get all sweated up. And then again, you're flustered and you're whatever is going on in your head. Now, it's not to say, I mean, we all have those hunts. If you mobile hunt, you are going to
Yeah,
get to
yeah.
you are going to get to the base of your tree at some point, at some time, and you will have tripped, you will have fallen, you will have sweated, you'll have sweared, and you'll have done everything, and you're like, "What am I doing?" But you'll climb up there and you'll figure it out. It's part of the training process that happens with a few of those hunts at the beginning of the year. But that's why it's always good to just throw your stuff on your back, even when you're scouting. Like practice. Make some runs up a tree, get your system down so
Yeah.
you know what to expect.
That's one of the things I like about I always try to get the archery antelope. It's a draw, but for residents, it's real high odds. It's usually over 90%. And I like to get that because that starts 2 weeks before the deer and elk season. And I get a lot of the rust out, a lot of the stalking rust, a lot of the gear rust. I get that out. And maybe I get a shot at an antelope too, but it's a good, real world practice. So let's do one more here and then we're at an hour and a half. We'll wrap it up. Pharrell asks, spring scouting right now, what clues are you finding the most helpful?
Clues that I find the most helpful. I
Yeah.
kind of touched on this earlier. For me, because I like that first part of the season, the areas that I'm going to focus on are areas that I feel like deer are going to be bedding in September, and why. And some of the clues are the things that I mentioned before. So if it's swamp, and I'm going to look for the subtle sign. So the subtle sign that is it's browse, and it's sort of like generational browse. So when you get into some of those areas, you'll see the red brush, or we're getting a lot of the sumac that grows up in these areas. Um, you'll see very subtle like nibbling of buds, or the buds will be eaten down in those areas. You'll see small branches in a bedding area that are broken down. Um, but if something that's being used over and over again, it's typically in a point where there's elevation, but during this time of the year, can be water covering it because they're not in there now, right? But I'll look for a heavy trail that's going in and out of that area. But it's kind of the subtle sign of, do I think these animals are going to be there in September? And if so, why are they there? And typically the why has to do with the safety, the sight, the sound, and the food source. It's a secure place that they have access to food. So I'll look around for where there's adjacent food. It's not always acorns or oaks. It might be, in some cases, a private crop field that's a quarter mile away. I mean, I've seen animals bed in a lowland area and get up and specifically move through it, and that 15 minutes of daylight, and then they'll get to the crop field after dark. But you've got to strategically put yourself in the middle of them as they move through that lowland area. So I really focus in on trying to find. So if I go into a hill country area, right? Those spots, they might be bedding in those elevated spots during the winter time. If you've got thicker cover or area that's protection from the wind, maybe it's a side of the slope that gets a lot of sun, so it's warmer for them to bed in those areas. They're protected from the elements during the harsh of the winter. They'll congregate in like little pine thickets and things like that that protect them from the elements. But where are they going to be in that area when September rolls around? Well, a common thing, I look for really thick, high stem counts on the tops of those hills, right? Or if it's on a bottom or on a low or next to a river, are there other thick areas of high stem count? And then try to adjust that to food. So I know it's a little bit broad of an answer, but I kind of focus all on bedding because at the beginning of the year, they're going to be going from food to bedding, and they're in that summer pattern of eating. So I'll look at, is there adjacent crop fields around? Beans are a popular one, right? You got corn. And then try to mark out, we had a good acorn crop last year, but that sort of runs, I believe, in 2-year cycles. So, this year might be not as good. But yeah, hope that helps.
I'll give my number one tip to anyone headed west this year. So if you're going to be a Kansas, Iowa, or not Kansas, sorry, Kansas, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, start scouting for water because we got exceptionally low snowpack across the west. And the 2020 and 2021, both last year was pretty decent, but in 22 was all right. But 20 and 21, we had real bad drought years and water was super important. And, in the Midwest, there's water everywhere. There's creeks and streams and marshes and stuff, but out west, it's super important. So especially early season, if anybody's traveling out early season,
And
I'd be looking for water.
Another thing I'd like to add to that is if I'm scouting a brand new area this spring, my expectation that I set is I'm going to make a bunch of assumptions based on the sign that I'm seeing. But to be frank, I don't know for sure because I haven't hunted it. I haven't put a camera in there to see how deer are moving. So I base what I'm seeing on foot by comparing it to what I've seen in other areas. Like the layout of the bedding area looks very similar to these other areas that I've hunted. So, and since I've hunted those other areas and I've actually seen how the deer move through there, then I can make an assumption that they're going to move the same way through that bedding area. That's no guarantee. You're just making an assumption. So I feel like one thing that maybe isn't talked about is that it is a year-over-year process. So find those new spots that remind you of other areas. If you're brand new to it and it doesn't remind you of anything, that's okay. Like note it, take in all the information that you hear from others that you feel like, oh, this looks like what I'm looking for, then hunt it, but have another place to go and hunt, and then hunt that and hunt that. You do 1 year of that where you hop around and you hunt these different hunches and you use the different things that you hear, you will start to recognize patterns and you'll have sightings. And then you ask why, and you go chase down that why. And if you get a kill, it doesn't matter. I know there's a lot of pressure sometimes people feel to shoot a big buck, but if you shoot any buck. If you have any success, that's going to build, you're going to start to understand how they move through those areas, and it's repeatable. And really what people are doing that are very good at this is they've become experts at recognizing those patterns that they've experienced and observed, but they're applying them to new areas. And then they're adding in the fresh sign that they see and, and everything else. So hunting is very much a pattern. It's a pattern recognition based thing.
Yeah, and if you're never exploring any new territory, then you're never adding to the knowledge base. So it's important to at least some percentage of your season get on some new stuff and not just rely on Old Faithful.
Yeah, and if you feel like you're in a rut where you're just going out in the woods and sitting, and you're just like, then completely change up the game. Even if it's your own private property that you enjoy hunting on, go somewhere else, or sit in a completely different spot, or think differently about how you hunt it. You are going to surprise yourself with the success that you'll have if you start changing it up.
Well, Mario, let's close up. If anybody wants to get one of these spiffy plaid jackets, where can they find one, and where can they follow you and or Hunting Beast Gear?
Yep. So you can get these fancy jackets at Stealth Outdoors. Uncle Lou has got them on his site. We also have a supply of them at huntingbeastgear.com. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram. I got an Instagram account too. I think I've only posted like 2 things on there, but info at Hunting Beast Gear. If you got any questions or anything that you want to ask, I answer that a lot. So I do thank everyone for their time. It's always fun talking about hunting. So.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in, and we should be. This is a little bit of a surprise, because that's why we had a Wednesday 6:30 or 7:30 instead of Tuesday 7. A little bit of a late break and schedule change there, but we should be back to normal next week. So hope to catch everyone next Tuesday, 7 p.m. Central. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.